Good morning once again, everyone. I'm Chris Brom on Farm Radio 1010 KSIR and KSIR.com, joined by Don Shawcroft, President of Colorado Farm Bureau. Good morning, Don.
Good morning, Chris.
How are you doing?
Doing well, thank you. We could use a little moisture down in the southern part of the state, but other than that, that's part of life. It's part of what it's like to live in western United States. You never know when the water's going to come and when it isn't.
Absolutely. It's part of the joys and the frustrations of living in Colorado. Speaking of frustrations living in the state of Colorado, some recent gun legislation was passed, some gun control measures, and area sheriffs, Colorado sheriffs, have teamed up to present a civil lawsuit against the state of Colorado, and Colorado Farm Bureau has jumped on board with that, correct?
That is correct. Colorado Farm Bureau definitely has a policy, and part of our policy book that was developed from the grassroots development of that policy, of our membership across the state. We have over 23,000 members of Colorado Farm Bureau in the state, and certainly not all of those 23,000 are either out in the country or in the metro area. We have a mix across the whole state, and our policy, which is, like I mentioned, has been developed by a grassroots effort, says that we should support the Second Amendment of the United States Constitution. And we believe, the same as those 54 county elected sheriffs, that this is in fact an infringement on that Second Amendment right to bear arms. In addition to that, part of the suit mentions the 14th Amendment and even mentions the Americans with Disabilities Act.
All right, Don, can you tell me a little bit more about the lawsuit itself?
Well, the lawsuit itself is really focused on House Bill 1224 and House Bill 1229, which did in fact pass in the legislature this past session and was signed by the governor. House Bill 1224, as some of you I'm sure are aware, has to do with the size of a magazine that can be used with a firearm. The restriction is that it cannot hold more than 15 rounds of ammunition. Now, that may sound reasonable, that someone shouldn't be able to have more than 15 bullets to shoot at one time. But what is really concerning to us is that the manner in which it was written makes it very difficult to enforce. That's where the sheriffs are coming from. And the fact that they do not feel like it is, in fact, constitutional to have this type of restriction on law-abiding citizens. You know, in a lot of ways, Chris, this is really the concern that we have in a fundamental issue, that what we're talking about here is restricting law-abiding citizens. Just in the magazine bill itself, one provision in there is that it cannot be, in order to be legal, it can't even be a magazine that holds 15 or less. That can easily be converted. As I'm sure many of those who are listening to this conversation know, that many of those magazines in a current firearm has to be able to be disassembled so that it can be cleaned and maintained, remove jams, remove problems. Well, that makes it easily convertible according to the law that was passed in 1224. That's just one of the bills. The other bill, 1229, has to do with, as it has been termed, a universal background check bill. While that sounds good to some folks, the real complications are the way that this is written and the way that following the letter of the law, and certainly what I believe is, in fact, the spirit of the law, would be very troublesome for rural Colorado. The law prohibits someone not only purchasing a weapon without a background check, but transferring to someone else. For example, on my ranch, we have several employees. They are not direct blood members of my family. Therefore, I cannot loan that firearm to them without a background check. To me, that seems totally unreasonable, very unenforceable, and in fact, a definite infringement on my right to own and use firearms in the state of Colorado, much less in the United States. Does that make sense to you, Chris?
That does make sense, and many of the concerns that people have brought forth related to these bills is the fact that they are very difficult to enforce, and many of them are considered to be unenforceable.
Exactly right. I mean, how can you possibly enforce that? Are the sheriffs expected to go around and inspect homes to see what type of magazine is accompanying each firearm in that home? Much less to say, all right, when did you purchase this firearm? Another one of the kind of, to me, almost ridiculous provisions of 1224 regarding the magazine restriction is that it is exempted if it is held by one individual, grandfathered, but part of the provision is that it has to be in continuous possession of that individual. So let's say that a military man has one of these firearms that in fact holds more than 15 bullets in one magazine. He leaves to go on duty and decides that it would be very wise to leave this firearm for the protection of his wife and his children in his absence. Well, according to this law, that magazine that was purchased prior to July 1, 2013 has to be in his continuous possession. She cannot use the firearm that has this capability of protecting his home, protecting his children, or in fact, if she happens to be a rancher or a rancher's wife who is involved in the military, and she cannot use that firearm to protect the livestock, there happens to be some threat that way, or in fact, heck, let's just let her have some fun. Perhaps she likes to shoot a firearm and she wants to just go out for target practice and have a good time.
All right, Don Shawcroft, president of Colorado Farm Bureau, is our guest this morning. We're talking about the civil lawsuit against the state of Colorado involving 54 county sheriffs and Colorado Farm Bureau. Don, what's the next step that needs to be taken with this lawsuit?
Well, the case has been filed, so the next step, in fact, is for this federal court to take action on this particular lawsuit. The real challenge, of course, is that in federal court right now there's a lot of backup because of drug cases that are happening at the federal court level. We do feel like we have some, at least a glimmer of hope in the fact that our Attorney General in this state has said that he wants to see a quick resolution to this issue, so perhaps he will have some influence in making this case move more quickly. We are hopeful because of the fact that other cases that have come up in federal court and in fact have even gone to the Supreme Court, have had a favorable ruling of late when it comes to Second Amendment rights. There's an interesting phrase in what is called the Heller case, that the Supreme Court adopted a rule enforcing the Second Amendment in that what they said was that the banning of arms that are, quote, typically possessed by law-abiding citizens for lawful purposes cannot be banned. That's the quote, typically possessed by law-abiding citizens for lawful purposes. There are many firearms in this country and that are issued and supplied, in fact, with standard 30-round magazines. One of them that certainly is in the news all the time and has truly been demonized, I think, is the AR-15. It is understood now that at least 4 million of these firearms are in the United States today. That sounds to me like a typical firearm that is possessed by law-abiding citizens for lawful purposes. Overall, Chris, the real concern that we have about this legislation is that when you make firearms or any other weapon illegal, who will have those weapons? Criminals. Criminals don't care about the law and what's legal. Someone who becomes a nutcase and someone who does stupid, crazy things isn't going to care about what's legal. That's the real issue that we have. A lot of the mantra has been, we've got to do something. Well, some of the things that we can do are not effective, and they harm our constitutional right to keep and bear arms.
All right, Don. Well, I appreciate your insight on this topic, and obviously this is a lawsuit that we'll be keeping a close eye on as it continues to make progress, and hopefully we'll have you back to keep us up to date on what's going on.
That would be a great opportunity, Chris. I certainly hope that we hear very soon and have a very favorable ruling on this lawsuit.
All right. Well, Don, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Don Shawcroft, president of Colorado Farm Bureau, our guest on Farm Radio 1010 KSIR and KSIR.com.